Hi, this is Mishuk Munir from the Real News Studios in Toronto. We have with us Assistant Professor Nader Hashemi, who teaches Middle Eastern politics at the University of Denver. Welcome, Professor Hashemi.
I'm glad to be with you.
From what reports I've seen, it seems that both pro-government and anti-government protesters are demonstrating in the streets of Iran. Can you explain that?
I think the real story here are the anti-government protesters. Every year for the last 30 years, the Iranian government has designated November 4th as the anniversary of the U.S. Embassy takeover, as a day where it rallies citizens in an official day of opposition to U.S. imperialism, opposition to U.S. foreign policy, U.S. arrogance, etc. This year, the situation is significantly different because in June there was a stolen election, there's the rise of the Green Movement in Iran, and one of the strategy of the Green Movement in terms of expressing his opposition is to try and hijack and subvert officially designated rallies and events that the regime has proclaimed as being a central pillar in its domestic and foreign policy plank, and that's what the opposition had tried to do today by sending its own protesters into the street and shouting defiant slogans, not against the United States, but against the regime, against the state of human rights in Iran, against the stolen election, in support of opposition leaders. And it's taken new momentum and new force as a direct result of events that took place this summer with respect to the presidential election and the wide perception that these elections were stolen, which led to huge protests and to the rise of a green movement of opposition that has rejected the Ahmadinejad what's widely viewed as a coronation, and there's been a series of protests that have, that really stem from events that can be traced back to the summer election.
We've been hearing stories of mass trials of the demonstrators, that people have been convicted and potential executions taking place.
Well, this is one of the strategies of the regime to intimidate and silence the opposition. What they did is they arrested not the senior leadership, but the sort of the mid-ranking leadership, almost the entire spectrum of the intellectual core of the reform movement that have been active in Iran for the last 10 to 15 years. Many of their most prestigious leaders were arrested, put on television in Stalinist-like show trials. There has been systematic reports of torture and rape in Iranian prisons. But with respect to the trials and the ongoing prosecution of the reformist leadership, that effectively was an attempt to intimidate the population and say, look, we can arrest these people who are loyal members of the Iranian political system. We're putting them on trial. No one can say anything. So if you defy us, we will do the same to you, if not worse. That was the message that the regime has been sending. And what's truly amazing about the demonstrations today is that despite these show trials, despite the torture, despite the rape, despite the human rights crackdown, people have still rallied into the streets, defying the regime and defying the Revolutionary Guards and expressing their opposition to the status quo in Iran.
After the elections, the demonstrations in the opposition was basically from the pro-Mousavi supporters. Has that grown to include others?
No, it's still led by the same group, and this is really a widespread coalition. It's a broad umbrella that encompasses many groups, many of them who participated in the election this past summer, voted for candidates that were affiliated with the reform movement, primarily Mir Hossein Mousavi, who was the leading candidate. And so it's the same group of people who come largely from Iran's middle class, but also reach into other classes. There's also a generational gap here. A lot of the people on the streets today are young people, they're students, they are upset with the social and economic and political situation that envelops their country, and they are expressing strong opposition both to the regime and strong support for the leadership of the reform movement. Of course, we don't know 100%, but there's just too many blogs, too many video recordings that have been posted on YouTube, too many credible reports that are basically saying the same thing, that there is thousands of people who poured into not only the streets of Tehran but the other major cities in an attempt to subvert an official government-planned rally and to hijack the event effectively in favor of the pro-democracy movement. So I think, like I said before, what's truly amazing about these protests was that they're taking place in the immediate aftermath of a massive human rights crackdown, where dozens of people have been killed according to official figures, thousands were arrested, many were tortured, and there was, as we just mentioned and discussed, a show trial of many of the senior leaders of the reform movement. So it is against that backdrop that these demonstrations are taking place, and I think that really points to the courage, the bravery, and also the deep-seated anger that exists among significant segments of Iranian society toward the current regime in Iran.
What's the future of this opposition in Iran? Can it really become a force, cohesive force?
No, it's a good question. No one really knows what the future is. We are heading into uncharted waters. And one of the reasons why there's a big uncertainty is because the strategy that the reform movement leadership has adopted has been one that can be characterized in the following terms: to still work within the framework of Iran's existing Islamic Republican constitution, to still express loyalty to the vision of Ayatollah Khomeini and the ideals of the revolution, but to really highlight the democratic and humanistic aspects of that legacy and of that revolution and of Khomeini's ideals. And so this points to a certain contradiction, because many people believe, myself included, that reforming the current Islamic Republican system from within the existing architecture of the current constitution is a dead-end street, will lead you to a dead-end street. And so there's huge uncertainty in terms of where this reform movement is going. The current strategy seems to be simply to mobilize and to organize and to engage in a long process of attrition, where it will seek to use events such as officially nationally proclaimed days of opposition, where people are allowed to come into the streets, encouraged to come into the streets, but to subvert those nationally planned protests and to shift it in the direction of a struggle for democracy, struggle for human rights, in opposition to the current ruling regime.